Now, here's the thing to know about this. President Trump, back when he was a private citizen, repeatedly tweeted about war with Iran as something a president might do for political gain. So we caught up with the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, earlier today and asked her, Hallie, if there's a wag the dog situation going on here. If the president is using the specter of war with Iran to really push past his panned summit with Vladimir Putin. Take a look at what she had to say.
The president's focused on a lot of things that are taking place across the globe, and Iran is one of them, and it's been something we've talked about since we first came into
Does he run the risk of inciting a war with Iran?
I'm sorry.
That tweet? Does he run the risk of inciting a war with Iran with that tweet?
Look, the president's responding to Iran, and he's not going to allow them to continue to make threats against America. If anybody is inciting anything, look no further than to Iran.
So here's the deal. I'm told the administration believes that a new maximum pressure campaign against Iran will bring that rogue regime to the negotiating table in much the same way the administration believes it worked with North Korea. Hallie.
NBC's Jeff Bennett at the White House. Jeff, I will see you in a little bit, my friend. Thank you.
All
NBC's Richard Engel is following a lot of the reaction, Richard, as this has created a ripple effect, not just to Tehran, but to allies in Europe and elsewhere. Talk through some of the new Iranian response this morning, calling this tweet psychological warfare, if you will.
So I spoke to an Iranian official who also called it psychological warfare. That seems to be the term that the Iranians are using to describe that. That's the line. And they think that this is part of a campaign that that we've seen, that they are flagging, coming from the Trump administration to insult them, to goad them into some sort of conflict. The Iranians will say that from their side, nothing has really changed, that they went into the nuclear agreement in good faith, that to all of the international bodies, including U.S. intelligence agencies, they were abiding by the nuclear deal. The Trump administration pulled out of the nuclear deal and is now up the rhetoric. And Iran has not changed any of its policies. It still wants to keep trade deals open with Europe. So they see this as psychological warfare, trying to bait them into making some sort of mistake and escalating the situation. So when you look at what happened, that's the response. But when you look at what happened with this tweet, this all caps, very aggressive tweet in the middle of the night from President Trump, I think there's two ways of looking at it. One, you talk about his temperament, and there's always a lot of focus on the kind of person, the kind of president that President Trump is, especially now as he's finding his stride, as he's really feeling quite confident. He went to Helsinki. He had that summit that a lot of people criticized. And on the back of it, he said, you know what, I'm going to invite Vladimir Putin to Washington. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. So he's feeling very much, he's feeling his stride right now. So on a temperament point of view, you can look at this and say, well, this is the president we always worried about, someone who's going to wake up in the middle of the night angry and threaten a war with a foreign country. On the other side, you can look at policy. You can look at this as not just an emotional response, but as this administration, the Trump administration, which is full of Iran hawks, making the case for some sort of conflict with Iran down the line.
So end goal, end game here, Richard, do you believe it's regime change?
Probably, yes. I think that's what we're talking about. If you're talking about a military strike on Iran, it's either regime change or defanging the regime to making the regime useless or ineffective. The end result would be the same, to drive Iran into a position of weakness with the same government or a declawed, defanged government, which again, the U.S. doesn't see as a threat, and Israel doesn't see as a threat. So I think that's. Don't just look at this as a impetuous tweet, but also look at the people around Trump. What he's been saying. Are they building a case?
NBC's Richard Engel in our London bureau. Richard, thank you. So Richard's talking about looking at the people around Donald Trump. One of those people is Secretary Mike Pompeo, who said this just within the last 24 hours. Listen.
The level of corruption and wealth among Iranian leaders shows that Iran is run by something that resembles the mafia more than a government. The proud Iranian people are not staying silent about their government's many abuses. And the United States, under President Trump, will not stay silent either.
With me on set, MSNBC contributor and chief Washington reporter for the Boston Herald, Kimberly Atkins, along with national political reporter for Bloomberg News, Sahil Kapoor. Friends of the show both. Okay, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley. The president will not find a lot of dissent among that faction of his administration related to this tough tone on Iran.
That's absolutely right. And if you look at it, I mean, I know there's a lot of concern that this is wagging the dog or some other way to distract the conversation. Donald Trump has been pretty consistent about this. So this is one of the few things that he has not really gone back and forth on about his disdain for Iran from the campaign trail, the promise to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. This is something that he sees as is right. I think the one question that this raises is we go back to that 2 hours that he spent with Vladimir Putin alone in a room. We don't know what Vladimir Putin has said about this, and obviously his influence on this would be great.
Right. If you look at the president's past tweets on this, it's clear that he believed that a conflict with Iran might be something that a president would do to bolster himself politically.
Well, so hang on, because now we're getting into the wag the dog conversation, right? And this is a conversation to have. When we set aside the policy piece, as Kimberly pointed out, there are real policy ramifications. We are 3 weeks now from those, as said, snapback sanctions go into effect. Right. Iran thinking, hey, maybe we're going to get baited into something, as Richard explained. So fine, that's the policy piece. From the politics piece, there is a discussion. Is the president trying to distract? Here's the thing. He sent one tweet about Iran, 5 on Russia, including in the last 2 hours here. He clearly is upset about Russia. He clearly is annoyed about that. I don't know. It seems as though folks who say the president's trying to strategically distract may be giving him a little more credit, just considering what he is now publicly talking about. That said, Sahil, you talked about these tweets he sent.
It's just as plausible that he's shooting from the hip. He's sending up a warning flare. It doesn't mean he's necessarily planning to launch some sort of a strike. Remember, the analog that you mentioned is North Korea, the fire and fury talk. That, of course, led to a summit with Kim Jong-un. A lot of niceties. You know, they ended the provocations at the time. They're still reporting that they're continuing their nuclear program. But it did not end in the conflict, the bloody conflict that his words seemed to suggest at the time. So this is a president who operates differently. His tweets do not necessarily indicate a straight line to his policy. But John Bolton, on the other hand, he has been a hawk on Iran for a long time. He's been openly calling for conflict with Iran. Just in March 2015, he wrote a New York Times op-ed that was titled, "To Stop Iran's Bomb Iran." So the policy is really interesting to watch for.
We had shown up those tweets that you were talking about this morning, as was Mike Memoli on our NBC team, that the president in the past has suggested that presidents have used Iran to change the topic when it comes to domestic politics. There's also the piece of this, as we talked about, Fire and Fury 2.0. Admiral James Stavridis was out this morning talking about just that. Listen.
He kind of did the whole fire and fury number on Kim Jong-un. He thinks that's what brought Kim Jong-un to the bargaining table. Now we see Kim Jong-un was the Potemkin village of negotiators. He's not going anywhere with those nukes. However, Trump is going to queue up that technique, try and use it on Iran. Terrible time to do it, because you absolutely have to have allies, partners, and friends if you're going to go into another war in the Middle East.
Allies, friends are not 3 words that are often used to describe this president's relationship with our European allies.
Right, especially right now after NATO, after he has been using very strong language when it comes to our allies and trying to work with people who are our adversaries. This is very similar to the lead up to North Korea that ended up with a summit. Perhaps he thinks that he can sit down with Rouhani at the end of this and talk. We know this president has an affinity for strong men who are leaders of authoritarian governments. Perhaps he thinks this is the same playbook that he can use here that he used with Kim Jong-un.
And keep in mind, America's most prominent allies in Western Europe in particular are committed to the Iran deal. They're not backing off that deal. They're still going to try to make it work. They believe it's a good deal. So the window of opportunity for President Trump to try to jump in and renegotiate this, that seems to have sailed in the Obama years.
But then there's Israel.
There is Israel.
Right. Which is looking at this, as Richard Engel said, and essentially cheering on Donald Trump.
Do they have the kind of diplomatic leverage over Iran that could force them to change their behavior dramatically? I don't know the answer to that.
We are watching this. No briefings scheduled for today, although plenty of questions to be asking the White House.